Well, welcome and good evening again. Welcome to Pangolin London's first ever live stream artist tour. Usually a private view would be a busy affair with only glimpses of the artwork. So we are absolutely delighted to be able to do this and to give you a completely clear gallery and an artist on hand to give you a special insight into the work. Just a bit of housekeeping to begin with. We are live streaming both on YouTube and Instagram, so please do feel free to make comments and ask questions. We'll try our best to answer all those live, and if we don't manage to do that, we'll get back to you in due course. For any sales inquiries, you can email us at gallery@pangolinlondon.com. For those of you who don't know Pangolin London, we are a sculpture gallery. We opened in 2008 and we are one of only a few galleries in the UK to be dedicated purely to exhibiting sculpture. I saw Susie's work almost 10 years ago and was instantly struck by her unusual approach to materials and the incredible way she combines them. So it is with great pleasure that I'm able to introduce you to the wonderful Susie MacMurray. Hi Susie. Susie, we've been working on this show for quite some time. It's called Murmur. Tell us about the title.
Well, Murmur comes from the installation, which is over there, which was a delight to make for that actual wall in Pangolin. And strangely, it's become very apropos with lockdown, because it's all about sort of taking flight from being trapped and wanting to get out and swoop and escape and celebrate life, but it being dangerous. So once lockdown happened, I really was focused on that. And the other work in the show is a lot to do with things that have been brought up for me by being trapped and by being, thinking about my relationship with the world and with children and with the dangers and needs of being in the world.
Well, let's go and have a look at it. It took you 3 days of installing.
Yes.
So tell us, what is it made of?
Well, it's made of essentially scraps of ostrich feathers. So I took ostrich feathers from another work, because I'm always cannibalizing old work and taking recycling materials. So there were ostrich feathers about that long that came leftover from another piece called Icarus. And I discovered, because I'm always turning materials on their heads and playing with them and turning them inside out or cutting them up or trying to find different ways to see them. And so I discovered that I could rip the little barbs off them, and I was dipping them in wax and tying them with thread. And just the way they moved really struck me, and so started to think about the shadows that they would make, and felt that this wall in Pangolin would be perfect for them to sort of almost affect a kind of avian murmuration, and they're doubled by their shadows, and it moves in the air conditioning. So in that way, it's very site specific.
And you've sort of either very cleverly paired them up. How was it that intentional? I mean, they're perfectly matched colour-wise.
Yeah, but that's because each pair comes from the same feather.
Right.
So they're almost like families. They're a little bit like siblings, or brothers and sisters. So I mean, depending on where you took them from the feather and the different characters of the feather, you've got huge variation. And I think some of them are quite sort of theatrical,
yes.
And then other ones are kind of tufty and a little bit spiky and punky, and some of them are sorry for themselves, and the more you look at it, the more you see the different characters, and we had great fun while we were making them, because we got fond of particular ones.
They have got their own individual characters.
Yeah.
I think, Susie, what I love about your work is the fact that on first impressions it looks soft and sensual, and then there's the barb of the fishing hook, which might be difficult to see on camera, but they're incredibly sharp. You would not want to get that on your finger, let alone your mouth. So tell me about that. Is it always an intentional tension between the materials?
Yeah, and you can get them stuck in your finger, I know from experience. Yeah, it is. I'm just interested in the sort of tensions and frissons that you can find between materials. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And I'm always trying to focus them, almost like tuning music.
Mm-hmm.
So these would have been completely different if they didn't have the little fish hooks, because they are very beautiful, but also they're not entirely benign. They've got little teeth.
Yes, absolutely.
They're clawing their way out of the building as well as
yes.
flying.
And I like what you said about, are they caught or being let free, or are they catching?
Yeah, the ambiguity of, are they caught or are they catching? You know, are they lures or are they, trying to escape?
Yes. And I love the way that you've really used the whole length of the wall and gone in and out with short wires, long wires, to really give that sense of movement.
Well, it's a bit like a sort of three-dimensional drawing, because normally with a drawing, you would, even if it was a wall drawing, you would be on one dimension, but to have the opportunity to play with depth and colour and tone with, it is essentially drawing in space, which is what's quite exciting about making an installation, because everything else in the show is ready to go.
Yes.
But actually, until this was made, I didn't know that it would 100% work.
Yes, well I imagine in the studio, when you make a piece for its own sake rather than site-specific, you've got time to get to know it, to adapt it, whereas a site-specific commission has that fear of, also that question mark of whether it's going to work.
Yeah.
Do you find it stressful? Do you enjoy it?
Maybe it comes from my performance background as a musician, but it's exciting though. It's exhilarating because everything else is under control. You finish a work and you don't put it out there till you're ready. But this, there is
comes to life.
But the excitement of not knowing and not thinking that you might get more than you expected you would get. And the thing I've discovered is for something like this, you can't draw a template for it. I couldn't work it all out beforehand. Any time I try and do that, it's just dead. So you have to actually take the risk, and maybe it's that danger that makes you.
Do you think it's also something to do with the collaborative element of the site-specific commissions that you enjoy? Because I know you come with a team, quite often they're helping you build it in the first place, because these are so incredibly time-consuming to make. Yes, I think it is, and I think that comes from the music. Comes from my music background. I'm used to collaborating and being part of a bigger thing that you make. An orchestra makes something that no one can do on their own. Yes.
And then maybe I'm sort of subconsciously harking back to that.
Yes. And
it's very companionable, because a lot of time a sculptor or an artist is working on their own. So to have company, people to bounce off, it's really nice.
So we've got another piece in the exhibition that relates to a previous installation piece that you did last year. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, well, this is Gathering, and it comes from a much bigger installation that I made last year in Patton Park, which was quite close to home, and it was commissioned by the art fair that raised funds for East Cheshire Hospice, which is a hospice close to home for me. And I have worked with this velvet before on a number of occasions, and for me it's got quite a sensuality, and it's very bodily. It's I see these as little entities almost, and the barbed wire is not just any old barbed wire. It has a provenance. It comes from MOD Aldershot, where it was on the training ranges. So it had been lying there since they were training soldiers to go to the Falklands and then Kosovo and then Afghanistan. So it's got a sort of history attached to it, and that was important to me in the idea of conflict. I used it in an installation called Cloud at Winchester Great Hall, but for this it was more personal in terms of sort of the conflict of a disease, fighting cancer or whatever. So, and the volunteers from the hospice came together to help to make it. And it was installed in Tatton Hall, and it's unusual for me to have a commissioner who wanted one thing, and then a site that I was trying to be, relate to in some way. But there was a costume ball, a winter costume ball at Tatton Hall at one point, and the host and hostess wore velvet, and it was very sort of theatrical.
Mm-hmm.
And this cascaded down in the space in the there's a rotunda with a cutout that goes through 2 floors, and there's a cupola above with lights. So I cascaded this down like sort of Spanish moss into the space, so you could walk right under it. And there was, it was many times as big as this, and then. Yeah, so it worked. It did 2 things.
Mm.
It responded to the ideas of gathering people together to care for people who were, in difficulty, but also it was quite theatrical and fun.
I thought it looked fantastic, almost as if it was growing down into the space.
Yeah.
But somehow, even though it was a historical building, it really felt at home, and yet was completely contemporary as well. Do you find that you often have to navigate that dynamic between the two quite carefully?
Yeah.
Do you often look to the history to give you a spark?
I do. I've realised that I often work with the narrative of the space, so I'll find something out about the history and relate it to the materials. And that's a wonderful way of finding new materials as well, because it makes me, think of things that I might not have thought of. That when I made Shell at Pallant House in 2006, I wouldn't have thought of using shells, but the story of the house brought that up for me.
And that was a lot of shells, wasn't it?
It was a lot of shells.
Of hand-clean shells.
Which, yes, there was no beachcombing involved. It was getting them from a fish restaurant and cleaning them.
And going back to the recycling of materials, there are a number of things in the exhibition. I think you mentioned that this fabulous piece, Anaconda, is. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, this is copper wire. Oh, sorry, aluminium wire. Yes. You're talking about copper all day. I'd used aluminium wire in an installation commission I'd done for a hospital, and had loads of it left. And I'm a magpie, I keep it all. So I started playing with what I could do with it, and discovered I could make it into rings. And then got the idea of making chainmail and discovered how to do that on YouTube. This, from being an installation that had been in a hospital, became another piece. And this is actually a precursor to the piece Medusa, which is made of copper chainmail. So yes, and you never know, the materials just keep coming back. So they're changing.
I can't even begin to think how long something like that must take to hand make. Do you feel like the hand making is very much part of the process? I think you mentioned that you find it meditative. Is that how you keep going through a big project like Medusa, which took almost a year to make?
Yeah, it is. I think it comes again from the musical background. I'm used to repeating things. I played scales. The discipline of practice and putting that time into perfecting something that is never perfect. So you have to keep doing it. So it's quite natural to me to do. And it's quite companionable when you do it with other people. And it's always exploring and finding new things to, new better ways of doing it. And it is a meditation. It does allow me, quite often when I'm making something like this, I'll solve a problem in some other piece of work.
Oh, interesting.
And it's almost that my brain has, I couldn't have solved that problem head on. It's that peripheral, I need the help of making or drawing to shift my brain.
Yes. Well, we've got a beautiful drawing here, which again relates to another textile. It's extraordinary. It's so powerful. It's really taken over this wall, which is what we were intending. So that's fabulous. But for something that's so delicate and so small as a gauze bandage, to have all that movement is absolutely brilliant. Can you tell us how you make them?
Well, I'm interested quite often in, like I said, changing your perception of something as a material, turning on its head. And in terms of drawing, it's changing the perspective, changing the scale. So to take something very, very small and fine and make it big it's an interesting, metamorphosis. So with these, they've evolved over the years. At the beginning, I was doing little scraps of net curtain that were very wounded. Shortly after my husband died, I was doing these very wounded works, and then I was drawing the hairnets, and then these. I look back and I realise that over the time they've started to take flight. They've been wounded, and then they've been healing, and they've been sort of containing themselves, and now they're just sort of, I don't know, they're leaping into the, I don't know where, which is very, again, it fits with the show.
And I think a lot of these works, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you mentioned that they show the fragility of us as a species, but also the resilience.
Yeah.
Do you feel that comes? Is that the progression of your drawing?
I think so, and I think, even though they're drawings, I'm not trying to push the boundaries of what drawing is in any way. I'm not trying to draw differently, but I think inevitably, I'm using it as a kind of tool to meditate and to relax. But inevitably, they're self-portraits. I still come out in them.
Yes.
And so they're, they have evolved. They're now leaping, and they're sort of accepting that they're fragile and frayed and not entirely perfect, but they're also dancing and celebrating, which is a good place to be.
Absolutely. Well, let's go and have a look at a new material that's a new departure for you, even though again the material has come from another.
Yes, it's another magpie material.
Yes, but in a different form.
Yes, this is deer antlers. So originally these were whole antlers that I used for commission at Attingham Park, and I've had them in the studio for quite a few years now. And I've always been reticent to use them because of the connotations of deer antler chandeliers and home decor and hunting and trophies, and I'm interested in trophy taking, but I didn't want that to be right at the front. So I've always struggled with them, and then I realised a few months ago that I could slice them up on the bandsaw. And that act of slicing is quite a violent thing as well in itself, which is interesting. So now they're exposing their internal, structure, and
which is surprisingly fragile, isn't it?
Yeah, the remnants of the blood supply. The sort of, you can see the sponginess of it. They're quite brittle. So this piece I've called Shaman, and it's got red velvet on the inside, but it's kind of slightly scruffy and clattery, and it's also served as an experiment for a piece that I'm going to make next year, which is called Stalker, which is going to be another garment piece.
Fabulous, that's going to look incredible.
Yes, I've learned a lot from making
it.
this.
I bet. It looks like a sort of prehistoric creature that's as you say, a shaman.
Sort of timeless, sort of fossilized,
absolutely,
sort of
wise,
rattly thing.
Yes. Imbued with something.
Yes, not quite sure what, which is the
great. Yeah. Well, and behind us we've got some pieces that show another material that you return to again and again, which I absolutely love. And I have to say, this is the first exhibition we've ever had where we've almost scored things on their edibility because they look so edible and delicious and just so sumptuous, and I think that's definitely to do with the wax you've chosen.
Yeah.
How do you make these? What's the process here?
Well, the process sort of was developed in an older piece that I made called Siblings that had fish hooks in wax, and it's a process of dipping, but it's so they're not cast, and there's something about, again, that repetition of building up layers. And then as I build them up, I carve them back, because if you just dip them, they would come out like teardrops. But so there's a sort of control and lack of control at the same time in them, and I just love the way they evoke the body. They evoke sort of something internal, don't know what, and they're sort of almost like things that might hatch, and they're beautiful and stable, but they might turn into something else. And again, the sort of juxtaposition of the wire. I was making this and I was going to cut all the wires off, and then I suddenly realised, oh no,
they look fantastic.
they need the bite.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And this one too, I love. This one's called Rapunzel.
Yes.
Because of the idea of fairy tale that's running through the exhibition,
I think
or
so. Yeah, there is a lot of ideas of fairy tale running through, and it's, to be honest, it's something I'm always interested in. And I think there's something in there about transformation again, you know, how materials can be transformed, and, you know, stories of spinning straw into gold, which is, I guess, what artists sometimes, you could be, you know, I mean, what is it? It's wax, it's bits of old metal, it's fish hooks, it's, you know, scraps of fabric, but yet it transforms into something else, and I'm just so interested in that sort of process. So, but also there's something a bit feminist about it, I guess. The story of Rapunzel is a kind of story about the protection of virginity. Mm-hmm. And, you know, again, the desire to escape, the young desire to get out there and, you know, experience the world, and the older, wiser women saying, just be careful, you know, keep you safe. And again, that's really, really relevant to what's happening now. So it's funny how those things happen.
Well, wax has been a starting point for some exciting new pieces, which, if our audience don't know, the gallery is very lucky to be affiliated with Europe's largest sculpture foundry, and so whilst we're separate, it does allow us to encourage artists who might not consider casting in bronze to have a go. And Susie, you've taken flight and gone for it, but these started in wax, and tell us how you sort of got to grips with it, because quite often if it's not something that you are envisaging, it's a bit daunting.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a wonderful push for me, because I admit to being a bit prejudiced about bronze.
It's got a very traditional reputation, but hopefully that's changing.
Exactly, and to actually go, and it was like going into, you know, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You know, it's just a house of dreams to go into the foundry and to be able to be in the wax department for several days and just to play. And I did. I just sort of played with what the wax would do, because it's a different kind of wax to what I was used to using, and to learn from the technicians. And so, I mean, I dipped some velvet in wax, and they cast that, and then these are little sort of carapaces that I found myself making. And I just love, again, that transmutation of materials, the idea that something is destroyed and something else takes its place. And I love that, you know, how it's sort of retained my finger marks and the sort of very imperfectness of the hand making in this process, that I was slightly frightened of, you know, handing over my process to someone else, because I'm used to being in control of everything.
Sure.
And to have other people finish making it. But I just loved it, absolutely loved it.
Well, you tried another different metal, which we can show you here, which has got a fabulous weight. And you've made these into beautiful pendants that will be able to be wearable sculptures.
Yeah, wearable sculptures, yeah.
How did you feel about the two different metals?
It was exciting, because I didn't know how they would turn out until I saw them, which is very strange. But yeah, I mean, I just love that each of them is a one-off. You know, the fact that the wax inside is destroyed and you can't ever make another one. I just love, you know, in that way it makes bronze casting more close to my practice than perhaps making lots of editions would be. But I just, you know, the different sensibility of the silver is beautiful, and the weight is unexpected, and I'm just charmed by the process.
Hopefully we've converted you. Show us this other piece behind here, because that's interesting, isn't it? Because you've actually let the process of the casting almost speak through the material.
Yes, these shards are bronze, and they're actually they were pieces of velvet that had been dipped in wax, but as you can see near the top, the wax drained down the velvet, and it remained some of the nap of the velvet. And then when they were cast, as the cast burnt away, you got this sort of failing at the top. And I just love the truth and the sort of remnants of that transmutation again. And they feel to me quite fairy tale again. They feel like, you know, sort of being turned to stone or turned to ice, and they're kind of ambivalent. You know, what are they? Are they shards of, you know, things shaling off? You know, they could turn into something else, and they sort of hover. And I wanted to keep the materiality of it. I didn't want them to be patinated and you know, turned into I don't know, a decorative object.
Sure.
They're just sort of retaining their history and the memory of what they were.
Yes, and suspended on the wall there, they take on a completely different sense, as if they were on the table.
Yeah.
I mean, these pieces are a whole collection of different materials, aren't they?
Yeah.
And we better talk about the piece that you talked about this morning on Woman's Hour, because you gave such a beautiful description of it. This piece here.
Well, this is Mother and Child, and it's one of a number of small things that I did make during lockdown. And there's something about going from the scale of installation and that immersive sort of powerful being inside something to something that's so small that you have to protect it and hold it in your hands, that gesture of you know, intimacy. And when I was going through the antlers that I'd collected, I came across this one, which is a first year prong from a culled deer. So there's even a little bit of hair left on it, and I just thought, it just made me think about mothers and children, and you know, the sort of the violent act of that baby being, you know, gone. And so it made me think about umbilical cords and, you know, the attachments to mothers and children and apron strings. And so this is another, you know, another wax ball that's sort of very maternal and you know, waxy and solid and reassuring. So I just found it incredibly poignant, and I wanted to give it something to hang on to.
And I think you mentioned something about the, you know, that difficult moment where you want your children to fly, but also
yes. Well, during
not be left
behind.
behind.
Yes, sort of during lockdown, you know, brought that all back to me, and in a way, like Murray, you're so proud of them, and you're so, you know, the joy of seeing them take off into the world, and the desolation of being left behind, and how you deal with those things, because I don't know, the world is a terrifying place as well as a wonderful place, and I think the work I make is constantly trying to reassure myself that both those things are okay to be together. And so I'm remaking versions of that all the time, and trying to understand how it's possible to you know, how can I still exist after my children have gone? But
yes.
I am, and I do, and life goes on, and you know, it's good as well as frightening.
There's one little vulnerable beast over here, also using the deer in this new way.
Yes, well, this is the very first time I used the deer antlers. This was a sort of experiment, and I realised it's a little foundling. I was looking for a title for it, and I was walking around, and I realised it needed to be looked after, you know. So, and that it is a foundling. It's not quite ready to be out in the world by itself yet. It needs, you know, it can't quite cope on its own, but yet it's going to be something interesting.
Absolutely.
You know, sort of, and Shaman came out of that, and then, you know, so it's a sort of process all the time.
One thing I've been meaning to ask you for so long is whether you hear music when you see your works because of your music background. Do you or no? And do you listen to music when you work?
I listen to music a lot. I do. Not always. Often I'll listen to the spoken word, but I do listen to music a lot. I listen to Bach when I'm drawing, and there's something about the sort of the patterns and complexity in Bach that seems very sort of natural, and it goes with the drawing. But I can't listen to classical orchestral music because I have to concentrate on it.
Right. Because
So-
you're always listening in the way
Yes,
of
it's
the
it
player.
leads me to, and it takes my concentration in the wrong way. So I listen to all sorts of other music, but I don't know. For me, it's a language that's replaced my musical language, and it's more satisfying. So I can make my own questions and my own stuff instead of playing someone else's.
And what would be your ideal objective for what would you like people to take away from this show, which I hope you'll come and see in the flesh, because it doesn't do it justice in 2 dimensions. What would you like people to take away from this exhibition?
Well, I guess it's the joy of materials. And especially in this time, that it's a real privilege, and we really appreciate, the feeling of touch. We've all been starved of touch. And I guess I have a sense of wonder at, how stuff can be. So I would want people to be curious and open-minded, and to, I don't know, have a sort of playful response as well as a sort of poignant response to things. I want people to feel.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Well, that's a good way to end, I think. Hopefully we've got a few questions for you. Right. Wow, my goodness. Susie, this is from Jane via YouTube. How do you source your materials? Oh, with lots of adventures, I'm sure.
Sometimes just by accident, and then sometimes sometimes I can't get what I need. So for the chainmail, I couldn't get chainmail. I couldn't get the wire in the rings in the size I needed. So the only thing I could do was get copper wire and make rings and cut them. So I literally, Medusa was made from scratch. Other times they're found objects, things like the barbed wire. And sometimes I have to go out and figure out how to get them, like the shells. And then other times it's good old B&Q or, Good.
Right, distant objects via YouTube. Will any of these amazing materials be cast in bronze? Well, we've shown you, I hope, that they have. But I think
it depends, doesn't it? I mean, sometimes I don't think casting in bronze for the sake of casting in bronze is interesting to me, but it's the transmutation of something that interests me more. Sometimes the material is what it is, and it's interesting because it is what it is, and if you made a copy of it in some other material, it wouldn't be the same.
Thank you. Sarah from London via Instagram, has any work surprised you in either the method or the way it's turned out? That's a good question.
Quite often.
Good.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I often joke that you figured out how to do something by the end. You get a technique for making something new, and you don't actually refine it till the end, and you think, oh well, this would have taken half the time if I'd figured this out a bit earlier on. And then I'm always hoping to be surprised. I think Echo was probably the biggest. I had no idea how overwhelming that would feel, and I'm always trying to get that back. I want that sort of, work giving you more than you expected.
For those of us that don't know Echo, describe it.
Well, Echo was about 10,000 hairnets. So, and they were gossamer fine, really fine hairnets. And there was violin bow hair, a few strands of it put into them, and that was bow hair that had been played in orchestra, so it had a sort of memory of music. And they made these sort of cranial forms that were very transparent, and we literally described the volume of the nave of a deconsecrated church. So you had this sort of hazy, they were sort of almost every 12 inches, 18 inches in space all through. It took about 10 days to make. And it was remarkable the way it behaved with the light in the church and how the light moved around. And it was, and also that was one of the last pieces my husband saw. And it was really quite emotional. But yes, that was the biggest surprise ever.
Nice to be surprised. Dean from Newcastle via Instagram, did you struggle being creative in lockdown?
No. I think artists are quite lucky to have a creative tool to use. So in a way, I think I was a lot luckier than some. I was on my own, but I had my studio within reach, and I had all the materials I needed, and I could use making as a way of sort of soothing. And in a way, because the show got delayed, I had more time, so it was an unpressurized time, and it was really nice to develop some things further. So, and it was so good to have the show somewhere in the future.
Yes,
something
to work towards.
Nicole from Glasgow, how do you select the names for your works?
Oh, it's a torturous process. I really like words. I love words. I think words are, they're another material, aren't they? And I'm looking for titles that don't shut meanings down completely. I'm looking for titles that evoke something and that give the viewer some kind of insight into where my head is and what the work, where it's coming from. But I don't want to shut it down and say, well, that's all it can be. So it's quite hard. I mean, it's very difficult to find, and I think titling is really difficult.
Yes, because we can be so lazy as viewers and just take the title as the meaning and not even look again.
Yeah, and what's meaning anyway? It's more about, every piece of work is almost a question. So you want to pull them into the question with the title.
Great. Well, there are plenty more, but I'm not sure how much time we've got, so I think we'll get back to you if we haven't got back to you already. Thank you very much for those questions. If you would like to come and see the exhibition in the flesh, please do. We're open from Monday to Sunday, and you can book Saturday. Sorry, you can book an appointment on our website, and we also have a few spare slots on Saturday for a day of private tours around the building here at King's Place. We've got 2 other new exhibitions to view, a sculptor's drawings exhibition and a fabulous new ceramic installation by Almuth Tevenhoff. So do please join us, and you can do that by emailing us if you'd like to come on Saturday at gallery@pangolinlondon.com, and Susie will be here to be asked all of those other questions. And I suppose one thing that we didn't touch on, which is actually a question, is why Medusa isn't in the exhibition, given that we've talked about her quite a lot today. I think we both agree she's too powerful.
Yes, and she's from another story almost, so she's just slightly socially distanced from the exhibition.
She's on the sculpture trail, so do come and have a look at her. She is quite amazing. Well, thank you so much, and I do hope that you'll come and see us, and you'll come and see this show in the flesh, and if you can, and if you can't, we'll soon have a catalogue and online, and this will also be recorded and online. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you soon.